For thousands of years, humanity looked to the stars with wonder, dreaming of what might be out there. But when the stars finally looked back, they brought not hope, but horror. The Zelnari, a powerful and ancient alien race known across the galaxy for their brutal conquest, arrived without warning. Their ships, black as void and sharp like blades, pierced Earth's skies in silence before chaos erupted below. These beings were not explorers or diplomats. They were tacticians, engineers of destruction, and they had come to claim Earth as they had done with hundreds of other worlds. The United Nations scrambled to respond, calling for emergency meetings, opening every channel, and sending messages of peace. But the Zelnari, who considered emotion and negotiation a weakness, ignored the pleas. Within hours, their assault began. Whole cities, New York, Tokyo, Moscow, were left in smoldering ruins, their beams of white-hot energy sliced through skyscrapers like paper, while energy shields blocked every counterattack Earth's militaries attempted. The world that once held billions was being reduced to silence, city by city, breath by breath. Beneath the shattered ground of what was once a military base in Colorado, an underground command bunker held the last hopes of coordination. There, survivors, scientists, engineers, medics, and soldiers gathered in tension, the air thick with fear and urgency. Screens showed red alerts blinking endlessly as reports came in from around the world. Captain Alex Ramirez, known among his fellow soldiers as unshakable and fiercely loyal, stood in the center of it all, watching the chaos unfold with clenched fists. A veteran of many battles, he had never seen anything like this. These weren't just invaders. They were exterminators. And yet, somewhere inside him, a quiet fury burned. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Above ground, amid the smoke and fire, a lone figure moved through the ruins of a small town that had been hit just minutes before. Sarah, a young woman in her 20s, stepped carefully through the rubble, her clothes torn, her face covered in ash. Around her were the lifeless remains of everything she had known, her home, her neighbors, her family. She fell to her knees beside what had been her mother's garden, now scorched black. And there, under the dying light of the afternoon sky, she cried, not just from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of helplessness. Her sobs were not loud, but they echoed in the ruins like a forgotten song. What she didn't know was that above her, high in one of the hovering Zelnari command ships, a camera lens had locked onto her. Inside the alien vessel, Commander Vorthon of the Zelnari stared at the screen. He had watched countless worlds. He had seen fear, resistance, even rage, but never this, never tears. The sight confused him. What were these clear drops falling from the creature's eyes? Was it pain? Was it surrender? As his officers analyzed the strange expression, something primal stirred in the silence of their cold, calculated minds. Though the Zelnari prided themselves on logic, there was something in that moment they couldn't quantify. And beneath that confusion, for the first time in a long while, there was hesitation. There was something powerful in that single moment of human vulnerability, something that didn't belong to their calculations. The girl was not holding a weapon, nor shouting in defiance, yet there was something more terrifying about her tears than 1,000 warships. Commander Vorthon narrowed his eyes at the screen, unsure of what to make of this strange species. A soft voice in his mind whispered what none of them wanted to admit. Perhaps these humans are not as weak as we believed. Deep underground, Captain. Ramirez received a strange report. An enemy ship had paused over a small town, scanning something for far longer than usual. No attack followed, no destruction, just stillness. Something was happening. And Ramirez, sensing the shift, knew this. War wouldn't be won with brute strength alone. Humanity had just shown the enemy something unexpected. And now, the real fight was about to begin. High above Earth, Inside the cold, metallic core of the Zelnari flagship, a meeting unlike any held before was taking place. The chamber, usually filled with the quiet hum of data streams and tactical reports, now echoed with low murmurs of uncertainty. The senior minds of the Zelnari Empire, beings who had never failed to conquer a world, stood before a screen replaying a strange and troubling image, a human woman crying in the ruins of a destroyed city. To most species they had encountered, emotions were either predictable or irrelevant, but what they saw here was different. Their machines had picked up a surge of chemical signals from the girl's body the moment her tears fell. These readings did not match fear or panic. They suggested something more layered, something the Zelnari had no words for. The leader of the council, Overseer Kyle, spoke with a sharpness that cut through the silence. "We have faced war, resistance, even sacrifice, but we have not faced this. What is it?" No one had a clear answer. Their databanks could not decode the meaning of grief, or the strength that seemed to grow from it. What disturbed them even more was the fact that their soldiers, those who had seen the footage firsthand, reported a strange feeling. A hesitation. In battle. An instinct to step back rather than strike. Something was wrong, something they had not prepared for, and that made them nervous. Back on Earth, far from the silent corridors of the alien flagship, the survivors huddled in the dim light of the underground bunker. Captain Alex Ramirez, still, watching the skies with sharp eyes, had noticed the pause in enemy movement after Sarah's moment of grief. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, but then came other reports. Zelnari drones hesitating at the edge of conflict zones, alien. Scouts retreating without explanation, targeted cities spared for reasons no one understood. There was a pattern, faint but real. Sarah sat quietly in the corner, still shaken, but there was a new light in her eyes. When Ramirez asked her what she had felt in that moment of loss, she didn't talk about pain. Instead, she spoke of stories passed down from her grandmother, stories of ancient warriors and families who fought not because they were fearless, but because they were willing to fight through the fear. "When we cry," she said softly, "it means we've been hurt, but it also means we still care, that we're still alive enough to feel it, and if we still care, then we're not done yet." The room went quiet. No one laughed. No one shrugged. It off. There was truth in her words that ran deeper than any battle plan. For the first time, they began to understand that their strength was not just in guns, machines, or strategy. It was in the fire that emotions lit within them. It was grief that had brought them together. It was love for those they'd lost that fueled their fight. And it was hope, fragile yet unbroken, that kept them moving forward. Ramirez saw something powerful in this, something the enemy could not predict. He began forming a new strategy, one that didn't just focus on military strength, but on unpredictability and emotional energy. If the Zelnari feared what they didn't understand, then humanity's greatest weapon might be the very thing they thought was a weakness. Emotions were not a flaw, they were a shield, a sword, and a signal. The survivors would fight with their pain, their love, their rage, and their hope. Ramirez looked around the room and saw people not just willing to resist, but ready to inspire others to rise. This was no longer a war of technology. It was a battle of spirit. And humanity, with all its imperfections, was about to teach the galaxy something it had never known before. Under the cover of a thick, ash-colored night sky, Captain Alex Ramirez led his team through the shattered remains of a city that once thrived with life and laughter. Now, it stood as a ghost of what humanity had built, its buildings broken and streets empty. But within that silence, something stirred, a growing defiance that could no longer be hidden. Hidden beneath the ruins, the Zelnari had constructed one of their main command outposts, a cold, glowing structure pulsing with alien energy. It was heavily guarded, protected by machines beyond human understanding, But Ramirez knew this was their moment. Armed not with advanced weapons but with knowledge of terrain, speed, and sheer determination, his team moved like shadows, slipping past scanners, disabling traps, and taking calculated risks. What made the mission possible wasn't just training, it was purpose. These weren't soldiers following orders, they were survivors, fighting not for strategy but for those they had lost. The raid began like a whisper, but within minutes it became a storm. Explosives carefully placed tore through the base's outer walls. Inside, chaos erupted as human fighters overwhelmed patrol units with speed and creativity the Zelnari had never anticipated. From the skies above, Commander Vethar of the Zelnari observed the growing chaos below. His gaze narrowed as he analyzed the battle feeds with practiced precision, but for once, the data failed to give him answers. The humans were not following any predictable patterns. They moved erratically, making decisions that seemed irrational, yet somehow led to success. They should have been too few, too weak, too scattered to launch such an effective strike. But here they were, disabling power nodes, cutting off communication lines, and taking down security systems in record time. The commander found himself asking questions he'd never asked before. Why were they fighting so fiercely when all logic said they should surrender? Why risk their lives when defeat seemed inevitable? He looked closer and saw something that unsettled him more than weapons. He saw emotion. The humans fought with eyes full of pain, voices full of fire. They were not acting out of duty, they were acting out of something deeper, something powerful and unpredictable. Inside the command center, Sarah moved alongside Ramirez, carrying supplies and supporting wounded fighters as explosions echoed around them. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a burning energy that pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat. She remembered the day everything changed, the smoke, the loss, the tears she thought were signs of her helplessness. But now she understood something vital. That moment of sorrow had not been the end. It had been the beginning. She wasn't alone in her grief. Every person in that team carried their own heartbreak, and together, they had turned it into strength. The Zelnari had never cried, never mourned, never loved the way humans did. They did not understand the weight of memory, of connection, of hope. And that was their weakness. Sarah looked around and saw more than a battle. She saw people rising from the ashes of their lives and choosing to fight not just for survival, but for meaning. Her tears, once misunderstood, had become a symbol. In them was the proof that humanity could break and still rebuild stronger. That they could lose everything and still find something to live and fight for. As the raid pushed deeper into the command center, systems began to fail, alarms screamed across the alien base, and Vethar was forced to order a retreat. He did not understand how a group of survivors could outsmart his elite force, but deep inside, a quiet realization took root. This war would not be won by numbers or machines. The humans were driven by something the Zelnari could not measure or replicate, and that made them dangerous. Ramirez, watching the alien forces pull back, knew the war was far from over, but something had changed. A spark had been lit. And as long as that spark remained, humanity would not go quietly. They would fight, not because they had to, but because something inside them refused to be silenced. The tide of war was shifting. What had once seemed like a hopeless, one-sided battle was now beginning to tilt in humanity's favor. The Zelnari, with their towering fleets and advanced technology, had underestimated one thing: the unpredictable nature of human thought. Captain Alex Ramirez, now at the head of a rapidly growing resistance, could see the changes firsthand. It wasn't just the surprise victories and small skirmishes. It was something deeper. The humans were fighting with an edge they hadn't seen before, using guerrilla tactics and an ingenuity that kept the Zelnari guessing. They exploited weaknesses. In the Zelnari's technology, systems that had been considered impenetrable by their invaders were suddenly vulnerable. The Zelnari's once unbeatable warships now had holes in their defenses, and their advanced energy shields flickered and failed when humans used tactics that didn't make sense to the enemy. Machines designed to obliterate entire cities were now being hijacked, sabotaged, and turned against their creators. For the first time, the Zelnari saw cracks in their perfect designs. The human spirit, the unpredictable emotional energy they couldn't comprehend, was disrupting everything they had planned. Across the globe, Ramirez worked tirelessly, coordinating with world leaders, military commanders, and civilian groups to establish a network of resistance. No longer scattered and disorganized, the survivors were now a well-oiled machine, each person playing a crucial role in the fight. The world that had been torn apart by the Zelnari invasion was slowly coming together again, stronger than before. News of humanity's victories spread like wildfire, uniting countries and people who had once been divided. The message was clear. Earth would not surrender, but the Zelnari, despite their losses, were not without their own power. Their ships, still formidable, continued to rain destruction on cities, and their troops, though disorganized, were relentless in their pursuit of total domination. But every time they attacked, something new appeared. Humans acting in ways the Zelnari could not anticipate. A soldier would strike with an unexplainable force, a civilian would outsmart a machine, and a child would inspire a hero. All of it was fueled by emotions: the love for family, the pain of loss, the fear of annihilation, and the hope for a future they refused to give up on. The Zelnari had studied every aspect of human behavior and warfare, yet this emotional undercurrent was something they could never account for, and it was breaking them. In the midst of a brutal battle, Sarah stood at the front lines, her face smeared with dirt and blood, her body exhausted, but her spirit burning brighter than ever. A group of Zelnari soldiers surrounded her, their weapons trained on her, their alien eyes cold and calculating. For a moment, it seemed like the end was near, but Sarah did not falter. She thought of everything she had lost: her family, her home, the life she had once known, and something within her snapped. A scream tore from her throat, raw and pure, echoing through the battlefield like a thunderclap. It was not just a cry of pain. It was a cry of defiance, of resistance, of everything humanity stood for. The sound was so powerful, so filled with emotion, that it seemed to shake the very air around her. For a moment, the world went silent. The Zelnari soldiers froze. They didn't understand it. They had never encountered anything like this before. They had witnessed warriors fight with discipline, with skill, with cold precision, but never with the kind of raw power that came from deep within the human heart. Sarah's scream wasn't just a battle cry. It was a force of nature, an expression of everything humanity had suffered, and everything they were willing to fight for. The Zelnari hesitated, for the first time questioning their own belief that humans were weak, insignificant, and beneath them. In that split second of uncertainty, Sarah lunged forward, her hands steady as she fired her weapon, and the Zelnari soldiers scattered, retreating into the shadows of the smoke-filled battlefield. Ramirez, watching from a distance, saw the hesitation in the enemy ranks. For the first time since the invasion began, he saw real fear in their eyes, not from their weapons, but from what they couldn't control. It wasn't just the strength of human will. It was something more, something that threatened to undo the very foundation of their invasion. And in that moment, Ramirez knew that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to prove that humanity's greatest strength was not in what they could build or destroy, but in what they felt, what they loved, and what they were willing to protect. And the Zelnari would soon learn, no matter how advanced. Their technology, they would never understand the power of the human heart. The final battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Zelnari, despite all their advanced technology and superior firepower, were now facing the full might of humanity's determination. For months, the Earth had endured under their brutal rule, but now, with the resistance coordinated and bolstered by an unshakable resolve, humanity had one last chance to take back their planet. The humans had come together, not as scattered survivors, but as a united force driven by a cause greater than any individual. Captain Alex Ramirez led the charge, coordinating the final assault on the Zelnari flagship, the heart of their empire's invasion. The massive ship hovered ominously above Earth's surface, still brimming with arrogance, but its once imposing presence was now a target. Sarah, her heart burning with the fire of everything she had lost, was at the forefront. Her hands were steady, her mind focused, as she led a strike team directly into the belly of the Zelnari flagship. The path was treacherous, filled with alien defenses and traps, but Sarah's determination and her team's relentless drive pushed them forward. Every step they took brought them closer to their ultimate goal, facing Vethar, the commander who had led the invasion, and ending the war. The ship's interior was cold and unfeeling, a stark contrast to the warmth of the humanity they were trying to protect. As they reached the command center, Sarah felt a strange stillness in the air. The Zelnari were preparing for them, anticipating the battle, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Vethar stood waiting, his cold eyes narrowing as Sarah and her team burst into the room. The two sides locked eyes, and in that moment, it was clear. This battle would not be won through sheer force alone. For the first time, Vethar's arrogance faltered. He had studied the humans, their weaknesses, their tendencies, but what he didn't understand was their will. It was more than just survival or tactical advantage. It was the depth of emotion that fueled them, the bond they shared, the unbreakable ties of love, loss, and hope. This was the very force the Zelnari could never understand. It was a power that wasn't born of logic or calculation, but of something far more profound. As the battle raged around them, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "You thought, we were weak because we cried," she said, her voice steady and filled with the weight of all humanity's pain. "But that was only the beginning. You've made a mistake. Humanity's strength lies in our ability to feel, to love, to fight for each other. And now you'll know what it means to face the fury of a people who have everything to lose." Her words were a challenge, a defiance, but also a promise. She and her team weren't fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the future of every human who had ever lived, and everyone who would. The Zelnari had underestimated them at every turn, but now, at the climax of this war, they would learn the cost of that mistake. The battle with Vethar was fierce, but as Sarah fought, it wasn't just her physical strength that powered her. It was everything she had ever felt. Each blow she landed carried the weight of loss, the hope of all humanity, and the rage that boiled within her. The Zelnari, despite their technological superiority, were no match for the fire of human spirit. Vethar's confident stance cracked, his expression faltering with every strike, every act of defiance that Sarah and her team displayed. With one final decisive move, Sarah shattered the control systems of the flagship. The ship trembled as explosions rocked the core, and the once unbeatable force of the Zelnari began to crumble. As the ship's power systems failed, the battlefield went quiet. Ramirez and the remaining resistance forces watched from the surface as the Zelnari fleet, disorganized and now leaderless, began to retreat. The battle was over, and humanity had won. The survivors stood in the ruins, battered but not broken, as the dust settled around them. They had faced impossible odds, and yet, against all expectations, they had driven the Zelnari off Earth. It wasn't just a victory on the battlefield, it was a declaration to the universe that humanity, despite all its flaws and imperfections, was a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy had learned a powerful lesson that day. The human heart, with all its complexities, was not a weakness, but a weapon. And no matter how advanced any enemy may be, They would never be able to defeat the strength that comes from feeling, from fighting for what matters most. As the survivors looked to the sky, watching the last remnants of the Zelnari retreat, they knew that the cost had been high, but they had preserved the essence of what it meant to be human. And no matter what came next, they would never be forgotten.